Welcome back, everybody. We're so excited to have this conversation today. It is Christina Torres.
And I am Nicole Stewart. And this is Reinforcing Conversations.
Shaping behavior, one talk at a time.
This is made possible through support from the New England Center for Children. For over 50 years, the worldwide leader in autism education and research. Through our schools, clinics, consulting services, and the ACE ABA software system, we are shaping a more inclusive future for all. Gotta love the New England Center for Children, and thank you to them for sponsoring Reinforcing Conversations. And we are so excited for this conversation today, right, Christina? I don't know many people who specialize in healthcare or ABA law or attorneys who know even what ABA is. So I don't know. What about you?
I don't know many. And especially with the learners that we support, I automatically think about like IEPs and the school systems and FAPE and all that type of stuff, right? Because it does get a little messy. And just like our field, we have a lot of jargon. It's always nice to have someone on the other side to explain that jargon side when it comes to like the legalese things.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, I really don't. I know like one IEP attorney, but that's about it.
I know a lot of special education attorneys who like can help with the IEP process because that was kind of like my space in New York City. But I don't know a lot of people. And even when I was looking at starting my own business and kind of doing things on the back end of like healthcare practice, I don't know people who specialize in that. And it's something that I remember trying to find somebody. And I was like, oh, I like kind of hodgepodged different attorneys in my life who had experience in different fields to do the best that I could, because I don't feel like there's a lot of people. So I am very excited for Ellesha LeCluyse to join us to talk all about healthcare and ABA from that legal perspective, and for our listeners to really hear about all of those pieces. So should we bring Ellesha in?
Let's bring her on.
Yes. All right. Welcome, Ellesha. We're so excited to have you. Hi.
Thank you,
it's so good to see you.
Yes. You
yes.
too. How's it going?
Good. We last saw you at the Edge Conference.
Edge Conference. Yes.
Yes. Yes,
I know,
when it was like 6 degrees in New Jersey. We're really sorry about the New Jersey weather.
That was my one dose of winter for the.
Yeah.
I know. I got excited when I saw your booth.
Dose of the winter.
I got excited when I saw your booth. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to connect, because I obviously have a business mentorship. So does Nicole, but having an attorney that understands this side of the space is so important. So I was like, oh my God, we have to connect. Can you share a little bit about yourself and how did you come into this space?
Happily. So I've been an attorney for about a decade now. Became an attorney sort of on accident. I wanted to go to medical school. And
Me too.
Then there's this class called organic chemistry in college.
Yeah. Sure. Familiar with it.
Failed it 3 times. So it turns out being a doctor was not for me. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do with the experience I do have? And I was in a healthcare policy class at the time. And I learned about healthcare lawyers. And I said, okay, lawyer, doctor, same difference. So ended up in law school instead. And I went to Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, and they had a healthcare law specialty program. So I got to do some really specific healthcare related things from the start in law school. And then I started working for a regulatory and compliance firm in Ohio. I worked for several firms in Cleveland doing all sorts of regulatory advising, structuring startup medical practices. We advised hospitals, chiropractors, rehab facilities, anything and everything. And then I started doing more transactional work, helping people buy and sell healthcare companies. And I ended up having a really specialized knowledge area in skilled nursing facilities. So I was doing a lot of work with nursing homes. And then eventually, our nursing home clientele, a lot of them started bridging over into the ABA practice space. So we just sort of followed, the money. And so I started learning about the different ABA things that they were doing. And then the more I worked on it, the more I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting and pretty complex. And that's my favorite type of legal thing. I like puzzles. I like to, get into the nitty gritty of the little regulations and figure out loopholes and things of that nature. That's my favorite part of lawyering. So we just kept getting, more and more people who are interested in ABA, learning more about it. And probably 2 straight years now, we've been helping people start up ABA practices, buy and sell ABA practices. And recently there's been a lot of compliance enforcement uptake. So we're getting a lot deeper into the regulatory side now too. So it was kind of a roundabout way of getting here. I just went wherever the wind blew me, and now here I am, ABA therapy healthcare compliance attorney.
Oh my gosh, you have
It's
a
so
whole
funny.
history. I know. I'm
Definitely.
like 7 questions I have now.
Yeah, it's crazy though to me because I was also pre-med, and then my major in college was called Health Science Society and Policy, but like that was Brandeis terms for public health. And so I was like in a very similar Yeah, it was like in a very similar space, and I had the same. I was like, "What can I do?" And then I ended up becoming a BCBA, and then a few years ago, I thought about becoming a lawyer. I feel like our brains maybe work similarly.
That's so funny. Yes.
But then everybody I know was like, "You don't go back to law school in your late 30s. That's no. Like, I don't know anybody who's gone through law school. Yeah.
Yeah. If I hadn't gone to law school straight from college, I would not do it again.
Yeah. Yes, I do not know anybody who's a lawyer who is like, you know what was a great idea? Law school. It was so fun and I really enjoyed it. And I really, I mean, I know people who enjoy being lawyers, but I don't know anybody who's like, you know what you should do for fun? Law school.
Law school. I'm grateful that I went because it teaches you a new way of thinking. Like you look at critical thinking in a totally different way, logical reasoning in a totally different way. It made me a lot more detail oriented than I was before. So I'm like grateful for the outcome, but it was a lot of work.
Yes, I have heard that. Yes. I got some people close to me who are lawyers who would also agree, who are like, no, Nicole, you're not raising 2 children and going to law school. What else? What else are you going to do?
If you do that, that's amazing. And I will like personally come to New Jersey from Las Vegas and give you a high five because
amazing. that could be worth it.
It might be.
Yeah. I love it.
I do have a couple questions because you brought up a couple points, right? One of them is I know that a lot of people, because I see it in like a lot of the Facebook groups where they have a company, but they're at the point where, okay, I want to sell. Do you have any data in like, okay, how long do average companies last before the owner decides to sell, especially since there's like a big PE private practice, issue going on in their field? What's your take on that?
Sure. That's a good question. It's a little bit less, a regular or average amount of time and more so a set milestone. So for the most part, to be attractive to a buyer, you have to be pretty profitable. So and even then it depends. So it's a lot of times the case where someone has started the business, they got it pretty profitable and they've thought, okay, I've done as much as I can. Let's see if we can flip this and make a profit on it, either because they want to focus on another practice or a different venture or something like that. But sometimes it's also the case that they get started and are making no money and bleeding a lot of money because there are a lot of operational expenses. So they say, okay, someone please buy this from me who knows how to do this so that you can turn it around. And then maybe they'll sell it at a lower rate or something like that. But again, it's not so much a period of time, but more so when someone reaches that milestone. So we've seen all sorts of things. We've seen everything from where there's a structure where BCBAs are starting ABA therapy companies and they get credentialed and then they sell immediately, like a shell package essentially, to someone who wants to get into the business but doesn't want to do all the credentialing work up front. And so they're a little bit in a rush. So we've seen anywhere from that, where they sell it before they've even started, all the way to, somebody's been doing this for 10 years or something before there was even insurance reimbursement for it. And finally, now that they see that a whole bunch of people are interested from the business side, they say, okay, well, we've already built this really good practice. It's been 10, 15 years or something like that. So here you go. So we've seen everything. I think the shortest we've seen was they'd only been open for about 2 months. And then recently we did have someone buy a practice that had been operating for 20 years. So all the whole mix. Yes.
So what are some common milestones in the business side of things that?
Sure. A lot of them depend on people's personal preferences, but definitely profitability. Like I mentioned, you want to be a certain amount of appealing to, especially a private equity company. If that's what you're trying to roll up into, you're going to want to be able to show, that you've had steady growth the whole time. So some kind of, statistic or data, even if it's not necessarily your revenue being more, but you cut expenses, or maybe, your revenue is more and your expenses grew, but just steady growth is definitely something that's important to be able to show. But really, you have buyers who have all sorts of mindsets. So there isn't one set rubric of, okay, I'm ready to sell now. I'm a very spiritual person, so I think your vibes in any business endeavor you do is super important. So especially here, if you're helping kids, if you get to the point where you don't want to be doing it anymore, I think that is the milestone when you
Wow,
should
that's
sell
a
it
really
off.
good point.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's going to be a buyer for every flavor of company. There's going to be somebody that wants to come in and turn your failing company into a huge booming business because they have, some special insurance company connections or tips and tricks of things that they've done before. And there's going to be people like the private equity firms where they say, okay, you've already built us a profitable business. We will hop right in and take your place. So there are lots of buyers out there.
Do you help people find buyers, or do you work with them once they've found, like, I guess I don't know how the process works. I only know about,
Sure.
like, let's say buying a house, where you have a real estate agent and then the
Sure.
lawyer comes in once you're dealing with like the contract and the sale.
Itself,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, typically the structure looks about like that. The parties have already met each other either through a broker or just their own connections, or they put out some advertisements that they wanted to buy, or the company put out some advertisements that they wanted to sell. Usually they come to us already knowing each other.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, though, we do have clients who come to us and say, okay, I'm in the market for this. Do you know anyone? And just
Mm.
by virtue of doing this work and being in this space, I probably do know a guy. So
Yeah.
we have lots of people that we can connect with each other too. So both of those different options happen. But usually it's the case that they've found each other already. They come to me and they say, okay, we want to buy this company. And they will have agreed on some terms already. Maybe they've come up with a purchase price that is based on some kind of valuation of the company or how much it's making every year or not making, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. How much, if they own property, that makes it a little easier to come up with a price. You can value that better.
Mm-hmm.
But they usually come to us with some of those basic terms. And then I have to walk them through, okay, well, you've thought about things like the money, which is great. But how about
Right.
your employees? How are you going to handle the employee transition? Are you going to use the same medical record system? Are those going to transfer
Mm-hmm.
properly? What about billing? Who's going to be making the updates? What about the documents? Do we get to use the seller's policies and procedures, or do you have to draft new documents? So they usually come to us with a basic understanding of, we're buying this company for a couple $1 million. And to the clients, it's usually, a pretty straightforward deal. So then my job is to say, okay, that's amazing. Let's make it happen. Also, did you think about details A through Z? So I walk them through all those different operational details. We document it all in the agreement and go from there.
What's the average timeline from when, like, okay, they meet with you to the whole closing?
I
Does
would
it vary,
say
or
an
is it?
average is a couple of months. Probably
It's
if
pretty
we
quick.
want to have the time to do everything appropriately, it's a couple months to negotiate the contract, maybe some time in between where they're doing some extra diligence work, learning more about the business they're buying, and talking about these operational things like the employee transition, transitioning over the client files, stuff like that. And so that's maybe a couple months too. So I don't know. I would say anywhere. We've seen some happen in like 2 weeks because everyone was super motivated, already prepared, knew what they were doing. And they come in and say, okay, we need to do this right now, draft it ASAP. And whatever, okay, we'll get it done. But in my mind, I think it makes a little bit more sense to spend the couple of months going through everything to make sure you transition appropriately. Otherwise, it can get a little messy. But there's a range. Depends on how motivated the parties are.
Do you like, God, what's the way? Is it like you represent one side, or you're like more like a mediator? I guess
Nope,
that, like,
one
I know
side or the
nothing
other.
about how this works. Like,
Yes,
I
yes.
know a lot about other types of law just from experience of like buying a house, getting a divorce, like that kind of stuff. But
The
I've
consumer
never,
facing things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is not something I don't have a business that's sellable,
Yeah,
and
we actually
I'm not in the
cannot
market to buy.
represent both of them. Yeah,
Okay.
so, sorry. Yeah, we actually cannot represent both of them. We would have to do one or the other. There's some lawyer conflict of interest rules about representing
Mm,
people whose, interests aren't aligned. And that's a weird way of saying it because everyone's goal is to accomplish the same thing. Our interests aren't aligned. But in terms of what benefits a buyer, versus what benefits a seller, there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily aligned. So they would each have their own attorney. Sometimes maybe one of the parties won't have their own attorney and then they just are kind of figuring it out on their own. And I trust the client to go have those conversations with them and make sure it's all working out okay. But ideally, both sides have their own lawyer.
Okay, so I have a question because you also brought this up before of like the different types of business models and structures. Like you said that there's people that like obviously BCBAs, right? That will start up a company and then they sell it within 2 months because they're just focusing on that startup. And then obviously there's people that are not BCBAs that are interested in buying, right? And then there's private equity. Like what are other business types of structures in this space that are common? Because another thing too is that like there's a lot of providers that are not BCBA owned and they're reaching out to BCBAs to help them start up in a state. Like, oh, I need someone. Can we use your
Right.
credential? And it's like, well, no, but this is a whole business model. And like, what is the
Right.
average fee? Things to consider for something like that.
Yeah. So that is one of the interesting regulatory schemes that many states have is that if you want to open any type of healthcare company, it can only be owned by licensed healthcare providers.
mm-hmm.
So that I'd say it's probably, I don't know, I guess in my experience so far, it's about 50-50 states that require the
Okay.
ownership and states that don't. So if you're in a state that requires a BCBA owner, and you are a BCBA, good for you. You've met all the criteria. You can open your own company. But yes, there's lots of business people coming in or people who've operated in other states but aren't a BCBA and they have the business experience. So the structure that the legal world has come up with is called an MSO structure, Management Services Organization, MSO. So the business person who's not licensed essentially runs a management company and it partners with the BCBA who can own the actual practice entity. And then this management company provides all the administrative services. So they're handling, the back office stuff, things
Mm-hmm.
like billing, HR, different, office supplies, scheduling, different really administrative specific stuff on behalf of the practice. And I think if you're a business person and not a BCBA, that's an amazing method of doing it. You find, a BCBA you trust, you get the BCBA to trust you. You guys partner together, and then the BCBA gets to focus on the clinical
Right.
aspects only while someone else is operating the business stuff. I think my advice to a BCBA versus a business person is a little bit different. If you're a BCBA starting a company, I would advise you to hire that person as your employee instead, and they can still do
Mm.
all of that administrative work for you, but then you have a little bit more control over them. But there are some people who get into this where it's the business person saying, this is going to be my company, I'm running it, but I need your license. Will you agree to sign on, pretty much just to check those boxes? And the person who owns the company might not even be the same BCBA that's like the clinical director or actually doing the services. So those could even be two totally separate people, and that meets all the requirements. So there's a lot of flavors of those
Mm-hmm.
structures where you partner with the BCBA. And even in the states where the owner does not have to have a license, you may still want to do something like that for, appropriate control. Financially, sometimes it makes sense because it's easier to know how much money the BCBA is going to get from owning their own company, what the
Mm-hmm.
specific fee is that's paid to the management company. And then also in the states where you don't have to have a BCBA owner, you could co-own it together. So it could be 50-50, a clinical person and a business person. And then they can share the profit like that. So there's a bunch of different structures. And in my mind you, I'm not like in there on the operations seeing how all these
Right.
things play out all the time. But in my mind, you can get to the same place economically and in terms of the division of labor with any one of those structures and in any state. It's just in some states you have to jump through a couple extra hula hoops and sign a few extra documents in order to get there. But yeah, there's a variety of different structures that the practice could take.
Yeah, that management organization is really interesting. I haven't thought of it like that before because I know Illinois, I believe, is transitioning to it has to be
Correct.
BCBA owned, and it's a
Yeah.
big issue because a lot of organizations are not BCBA owned currently.
Exactly. So they need to, transition into that structure or find a BCBA. They need to figure something out.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you said like this is what you can do, like legally you check all the boxes, but it's not necessarily ethical, which is like a whole other piece that you can't really
Exactly.
tackle. But like my opinion would be like I wouldn't sign on to lend you my credentials, even if I'm making money off of it, because who knows what the company's actually doing.
Right, right. And the amount of oversight, because the risk of that is entirely on the BCBA owner. So you can't own this company, but then, subcontract out the whole operation to someone else. And then when the time comes for an enforcement action, the BCBA can't say, "Oh, well, I didn't do it." If
Right.
you
It's all
own the company, you did it.
right. And I
Everyone
know.
underneath of it is your delegate, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because I don't know if people go into things like that, but I could see how it could be tempting to just be like, okay, I give you my credentials and then like I earn money off of this and like I don't
assure
have to
you
do that much.
plenty of people do go into it.
Oh
That
yeah,
way.
so do
You
you
see
get
it all the
people?
time.
That's a good question. Do you get people where this situation has come up and then what happened? Like where they then have legal issues as a result?
I haven't seen, knock on wood, I haven't seen that blow up anywhere yet.
Okay.
But we do have plenty of people. I would say that's probably how we started actually, was business people coming in and saying, "We know this BCBA, she's going to sign on to our company, but help us figure out how to document all of that." And the BCBA was not involved in the company itself, lent the credentials, made a percentage of the profit. And like I said, so far so good. So I have not seen that blown up yet. I have seen several situations where you've got a business team and a BCBA who cannot come to terms to even start it. So we have seen that situation where it blows up really early. So I think that's for the best, honestly. Catch it before you've started operating instead of in, 2 years when there's a bunch of money and an actual liability on the table. But I'm sure there are situations where maybe it gets a little bit sticky, but so far we've seen it work out. And I think that having the right documents in place is super important to keep everything going smoothly, because that's my job, is to say, before you've even entered into the arrangement, okay, well, let's think about what happens in 2 years when you guys are fighting and you want to split ways. What is the plan? And sometimes people will be like, "Oh, well, we don't need to worry about that now." But I insist that you worry about it now, because it will be way easier to have a separation, if you've planned it out beforehand. So for the most part, that's what the agreements say. They say, if we ever part our ways, we'll give you 40% of this year's revenue. We take 60% of this year's revenue. Contract is over. We move on. And if it's that MSO type of structure, I make them agree beforehand who gets to keep the practice. Is this the BCBA's practice where the MSO is going to go away and the BCBA stays? They have the patients, they get everything, and they get to find a new manager if they want? Or is it the case that the MSO is going to keep the right to have this management contract and find another BCBA and replace the existing BCBA? So I walk everybody down the whole path of every possible thing that could go right and could go wrong. We think about it first and then we document it before
Yeah.
you even get started.
Well,
Yeah.
you
As
mentioned
someone who's been through a divorce, I appreciate that. Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
Exactly. No, it's like a prenup for
Yeah. Yeah, for
and
business.
I have been too. So those are also the things I'm thinking about. I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
who gets the kids?
Yeah,
Who gets the
right.
house?
Yeah.
I was gonna
Exactly.
say, You mentioned the rev share portion. So, like with that business structure, because I've been asked several times, like, oh, we're expanding in other states, or they're asking me because I have a huge network, like, oh, do you know any BCBAs that are in this states to start up? What is that average salary? If it's the MSO, it's a rev share, because I also hear that there's also like a monthly flat fee retainer. And it's like, okay, you can start my credentials, and then once you get a BCBA on board, you're gonna transition over there. Or it's like, yeah, we could start up, but you're not billing underneath my thing until you find another BCBA. Like, what are common compensations and
Sure.
different structures for that type of partnership?
Yeah, so number wise, I can't necessarily speak to exactly what is average. A lot of the salaries they kind of agree to on their own, and we maybe plugged a number in somewhere, but I wasn't too involved in them agreeing to that. But structure wise, there's a few different ways to do that too. All of this is really flexible. Like some things, there's a hard line in the sand where you absolutely can't do this. But for the most part, the parties can make up whatever arrangement they want, and we can probably get there. So usually it's the case that if someone is just letting a BCBA is just letting a company essentially use their license, the BCBA will probably just get a profit share. And I've seen
Mm.
anywhere from 1% to 50%. It just depends on how involved they're going to be, how well everybody knows each other, what they're comfortable doing, etc. And then if they are going to be providing some kind of clinical service, maybe they're going to be a clinical director. They're overseeing all the BCBAs, but they aren't necessarily actually providing services. Or maybe they will be the BCBA actually doing therapy themselves. And so then they'll have a salary probably also that is, in line
Hmm.
with that. And we've also seen a situation where the BCBA will just help them in the beginning with, credentialing or getting all the policies in place. Like some of those more clinical policies are things that lawyers can't write. I can't tell you what's medically necessary or what the appropriate steps are for this type of intervention or whatever. So some of those documents you do need a BCBA to really
Mm-hmm.
write up your protocol for the practice. So sometimes they'll be on short term and just get paid for that. Sometimes, if they're going to be really involved in the practice, they won't even get a profit share at all. It's just an employment agreement where they have some kind of salary. Maybe there's bonuses. Maybe they agree that the compensation includes like a percentage of the revenue or something like that.
Mm.
But there's all those different varieties of structures for that too. But it seems that everyone's getting paid. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities and a lot of good money to be had here.
Yeah, I mean, I've been approached before to help people start up with the clinical policies and documents and been offered profit sharing. And it hasn't necessarily panned out for whatever reason, but I do help companies. The profit sharing part hasn't panned out. Helping companies has.
Sure, yeah.
And I can see how that is a needed thing. Although I would say, beyond like standard employment and like standard contracts or agreements, there's not much. I think it's when it gets into the profit sharing that things start to get like, how long are you profit sharing for? How much? Like when do you start the profit sharing? I feel like those things start to get tricky.
Exactly. And it's because they're more flexible. So, yeah, some of the documentation, it has to say this. So it's easy to figure out. But things like that, how we're going to share the money. And in those states where BCBA ownership is required, it's usually
Mm-hmm.
the case that they probably also have a rule called a fee splitting prohibition, which means in basic terms, any money that a licensed person receives for providing licensed services, they cannot share it with an unlicensed person. So the way that that gets interpreted is that's why people who are not licensed can't own those companies because they're not allowed to just have 50% of the profit or whatever, because that's fee sharing. So when they do this MSO structure, there's also rules about what amount of money can you give them. And in some states, for example, you have to come up with a set monthly fee, like $10,000 a month or something. So they can't necessarily just say, give me 50% of the profit to move it over there. So those are
Wow.
some of the rules that do exist about getting money to the non-licensed people. But when it comes to the BCBA, 100% of the money coming into the company legally could go to them. So there's a lot more flexibility and negotiation room for a BCBA to say, well, legally, this is all my money. So you should give me this
It's my
bigger
license.
percent of it. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I have definitely, I've been on both sides of the equation. And when I am representing the business people, I can't like advocate for the BCBA. But when I am representing the BCBA, I'm like, okay, you go in there guns a-blazing. You
Yeah.
tell them this is what you want and you go get it.
I love that you mentioned that, right? Because like you got to remain neutral, but it's like, okay, well, I'm favoring or advocating for this behalf. So we're obviously BCBAs in
Exactly.
business.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you would like? What gun blazing? Like, what are some things for BCBAs to be mindful of if they're considering a venture like this?
Definitely. So I would say the biggest risk factor is billing, because a lot of the business people will come in and some of them are totally green to the healthcare industry. They have never ran any type of healthcare company, let alone an ABA
Mm-hmm.
therapy company. And the billing requirements are extremely specific, which most clinical people know that because your
Yes.
documentation is how we submit the bill. But
Right.
sometimes the business people don't know all these same details. So if I were a BCBA, I would ask for, audit rights to be able to audit all the
Mm.
bills. I want to have access to all the records. I want to make sure that I have oversight on everything. I would make sure that I'm not excluded from any portion of it. So even if we're letting them handle HR, we're letting them handle billing, we're letting them order the office supplies, whatever, I would definitely want audit rights to make sure I can go check every single thing that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. And I think that the risk to the license is huge. So I would also be asking for much more money than like 1% or the things that I've seen from some people before.
Yeah.
Even if I were like a semi-retired provider, which is a lot of times the people who end up in that ownership position. They're not
Mm.
really practicing anymore, but they have a license. So let's make some money on the license by letting that happen. But I would pay a lot more attention to everything that is going on. If I were the BCBA, I'd want to have, an equal profit share, and I'd want to make sure that I can get rid of the management company. I'd want to make sure I can cancel the contract at any time and that the
Mm-hmm.
documents say that I get to keep the practice. This is my practice and you're just here as like a vendor. So if I were a BCBA, those are the positions I would take, and I'd be really stern on them. And I promise you will get people who are interested in that. There will be some people who are not. Some business people will come in and say, no, you either let me use your license for a small amount and leave us alone, or we're not picking you. And they'll find somebody else. They'll find another BCBA who
Right.
wants that money. That's fine. But if I were doing it, I'd want it to be more of a full partnership versus just letting them use my license. Yeah.
So, what are red flags when someone is considering buying an ABA practice? Because I also know of like, there's a lot of insurance fraud going on. And it's like, okay, am I responsible for their fraud if I carry this over? So, what's your
Ooh.
take on that?
That's a great question. So, two-part question. I'll start with one, are you responsible for their fraud? Which you can be. So, if you're buying a practice, there's two ways to do it. You can either buy the existing company and basically you just switch out the owners and then you become the
Mm-hmm.
owners of that
Got
existing
it.
company. Or you can open a new company, you open a totally new LLC, you can call it whatever, and you just buy the assets of the seller company. You just buy the stuff. So you get, if they had a lease for office space, you get to take that over. The medical records transfer to you, the right to treat these patients transfer to you. And there's even a way to go to the different third-party payers and say, hey, we bought all of the stuff from this company. They're not operating anymore. So please replace me on their billing contract. So there's the two options. And when you do the option where you just buy the stuff, there's much less risk that if the other company did some fraud beforehand, that it'll ever come on to you because you started a whole new company. A new tax ID is like the
Mm.
critical factor. It's a different person, a different person for business purposes. But that usually takes longer. And the method of getting those payer contracts, like with the commercial companies, Aetna, United Healthcare, whoever, switched over, isn't foolproof. So sometimes they might have to start re-credentialing completely and get new
Wow.
Insurance
That's a
contracts if they buy just the stuff. So that's why a lot of people buy the whole company. They just switch themselves out for the sellers and then they're the new owners of the company. But when you do that, you take over their existing tax ID, you keep their same company, you keep the same name. Everything is the same. It's just the people who own it are now different. However, that means that if some fraud comes up from 5 years ago that ABC LLC committed, well, you now own ABC LLC. So they don't care that the fraud was done while someone else owned it. So you will be the one dealing with that. So that's another thing that we put in the contract, in the purchase agreement. Okay, if something comes up in 2 years where there's an audit and then the government, Medicaid, whoever is trying to take back $2 million, who's responsible for that? And we would obviously want, the seller to be responsible for it if it was during their period of time that they owned the company. But then you think about, okay, well, the seller has already sold their company. Do they even have $2 million to pay for this? So there's a lot of different techniques we use there too. Maybe there's a bunch of money that we hold on to and we put it in an escrow account and we say, okay, this money is going to sit here for several years to make sure you guys don't have some kind of audit or a fine, or maybe there was a HIPAA breach that nobody knew about and there ends up being a fine for that in the future or something. So you do have to think about all those different liability things, and we can document it the best we can on the piece of paper. But what it truly comes down to figure out who's going to pay what is you need to be doing business with people who are going to be true to their word. Because they can sign a contract that says, I promise to pay you this $2 million. But if they don't have $2 million when the time comes, they're going to say, sorry, I don't have it. And then you
And what
just
are you
have to
going to
deal
do?
with it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
like what do? You could take them to court, but like that's an expense for you. It's not, yeah.
Precisely. Litigation is expensive and complicated and takes a really long time.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a risk to consider. So that's why when you first get in there, before you even buy it, you want to do diligence. Due diligence period is what it's called. You get a set amount of time, either before you sign a contract or maybe after, where you get to go look at all their records. You get to look at their past bills. And I would say, let me see some of the specific documentation, some of the entries. Let me make sure I like how you were submitting bills. So I would try and audit all that stuff beforehand. But even if you do, there's still no guarantee that it was all done correctly. So that's definitely a risk you have to keep in mind pretty much forever. Well, for 6 years. 6 years is the statute of limitations for how long Medicaid or a commercial payer can take their money back from you. So once you've made
Wow.
it to 6 years, you're probably home free. But anytime between now and then, there's a chance. So yeah, that's
That's
definitely a
crazy.
risk. And when you just buy their same company, you're technically buying all of their potential liabilities. So surely things to think about.
Yeah. Can I ask you about HIPAA and HIPAA compliant? Like, because you mentioned HIPAA,
Sure.
and that I was like, oh, that's a topic I really wanted to talk about because I know like RBTs often don't even know that they like I've worked in places where RBTs are not even aware that HIPAA guide it maybe exists, or maybe they know in the context of like
Right.
working with their own doctors, but not that it guides our practices. And then BCBAs, I feel like it's like we don't know all the pieces, and I think businesses are not ABA businesses don't feel as tight in my experience as healthcare businesses. Would you say that's
Sure.
accurate?
Sure. And I think that's because a lot of ABA companies don't necessarily see themselves as a traditional healthcare provider. So they think, oh, HIPAA maybe only minimally applies to me. But if you are getting paid for a service that is billed to an insurance company, you are a healthcare provider that has to comply with every single letter of HIPAA. So every part of HIPAA applies to an ABA therapy company just as strictly as a hospital. And that's something that, Christina, you asked about red flags for, if you're buying a company, if you get in there and they don't even have a HIPAA policy, red flag.
Mm,
Because if they aren't doing HIPAA correctly, are they billing correctly? Did they
right.
classify their employees correctly? Do they even know what fraud and abuse is if they didn't know what HIPAA is? So, things like that. If, the documentation doesn't even exist, it's a big deal. And that is another thing that comes back onto the owner of the company. So for every healthcare practice, whoever does own it, whether it's business people or BCBAs, all the liability is going back to those owners. So I think a lot of the owners don't necessarily know this is a traditional healthcare provider under the HIPAA definition. So we have to have a whole HIPAA policy, and usually it's a manual. Like my template that I use to put them together for people is 77 pages or something. It is a very big document. And there's a whole statutory list in HIPAA that says you need to have a policy on this. You need to have a policy on this. You need to have a policy on this. And of course, the law doesn't say what the policy has to say. It just says you need to have one. So then we have to use our creative thinking to figure out what we're going to do in this scenario. Who is the person that you report to if there's a HIPAA issue? How do we make sure only the right people are accessing the right patient records? Like, for example, something that is a common HIPAA breach issue is a provider will say, oh, I know this person who goes to the practice, I'm going to go look up their record. But they don't treat that person, they don't work on their case, that's a HIPAA breach. If someone in your organization who's not treating that person looks at someone else's medical record, like, that's an issue. So those are things that you need to have a policy about. You need to train people about it. The requirement, I think, is to train everyone within 30 days of being hired, and then once a year after that. So these are things that we have a lot of ABA companies that come to us and say, okay, we've been operating for 3 years, and now we want to see if our documentation is right. So I have a checklist. I give them my little checklist. I say, do you have all of these things? And a lot of times they say no.
Gosh.
Just get it together as soon as you possibly can. But yeah, HIPAA applies to ABA therapy just like it applies to every other company. You have to protect all the information in a certain way. You have to have documented policies about it. You have to train people on it. And then you have to actually enforce your policies also. And that's a pretty big compliance area for people, is they'll get all the, even if they do have all the documentation, they're not following it. And the government doesn't like give you brownie points for writing it down, but not doing it.
Right.
You have to do what you wrote down too.
Yeah, they don't really teach us any of this stuff in school. I remember the only thing that came with security was,
Probably
hey, you
not.
need to have it 2 layers of lock. So you need to have it locked in a filing cabinet and then a door that's lockable. So that was like,
Exactly.
and we
Well,
have
and
to keep our
now
documents
it's
for
all
7 years.
electronic records. So all that guidance doesn't even apply anymore. Now it's you
Right.
need to have multi-factor authentication when you're logging into the password. The password has to be so protected. You have to make sure your computer auto logs out after a certain period of time. But yeah, at my very first job as a lawyer, one of the things we did is we went around to all the nursing schools, like in the northeastern Ohio area, and gave a presentation to all the graduating nurses, like right before their graduation, on HIPAA, because the schools were like, well, this isn't something we teach. Nobody knows about this. So that was
Right.
something that we did, is came and gave this whole, it was like an hour and a half overview of everything that applies, what you have to do, let them ask questions. And I was surprised to find that they knew nothing. I was like, nowhere in your 8 years of
Nowhere.
school now did we
Oh,
talk
no. I
about
mean,
this?
like, for me, to be fair, I have a teaching degree, so we talked about FERPA extensively.
Sure.
Then in my advanced certificate in ABA, it wasn't. But also, to be fair, I've been a BCBA for so long that there wasn't an autism insurance mandate when I became a BCBA.
Sure. Right.
So HIPAA back then, probably we weren't in the healthcare space that much.
Yeah, it was probably a little more flexible then. That's fair.
Yeah, so I think it was like maybe a different world, which I think also, like, a lot of our leaders don't have this education either, because they came up in spaces where it was largely education or private or outside of the healthcare space.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We're missing it.
And Ellesha, like, even in the field, like, there's huge, like, RBTs and BCABAs cannot be 1099, but companies are hiring them as contractors. But nobody knows, because, like, I mean, I'm announcing it, and the BACB sends out their articles, but, like, the companies are not following. They don't have to follow our BACB ethics code. It's up to us.
Right.
But that's a tax problem, though. That's not a BACB ethics code problem. That's a tax problem, isn't it? It's
Both.
an IRS thing. Yeah.
Because yeah, if you misclassify an employee as a contractor, that means that when the company's paying them, they're not deducting taxes and they're not paying the withholding portion to the government. So that's an issue if they eventually determine they were classified wrong. And the reason they're typically classified wrong is because people aren't necessarily thinking about the supervision requirements. And that's like the main distinctive factor about whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee is, are they being supervised and controlled by the company? So a BCBA, you have a bit of a better argument, a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
better chance that they may be more independent, but an RBT for sure. They only exist, they can only practice because a BCBA is delegating things to them. They don't have an independent scope of practice. An RBT can't just go provide ABA therapy. It has to be according to the BCBA's treatment plan delegation under the BCBA's supervision. So when the company has that much control over someone, you cannot argue to the government with a straight face that they're an independent contractor. And people say, oh, well, we kind of let them pick their schedule and they schedule with the clients and they have, flexibility with timing and they're using their own car. They're going to the home. They're not even coming to our office. So they describe all these things that make it seem like they're independent. But in order for an RBT to provide services, period, it has to be under the supervision of a BCBA. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no way to argue that they're an independent contractor. And we do see this all the time. And we sort of walk people back to doing what they're supposed to do. But I mean, that comes down to, you have to remember the business people who come in, their goal is to make everyone money, including, a BCBA partner. They want to make everyone money. They're trying to cut costs. They're trying to be as efficient as possible. So they're not necessarily thinking about these things when they're thinking about, the best way to run a business. And in a lot of other areas that aren't healthcare, maybe what they think is a good way to classify people is a good idea. Maybe that would work somewhere else. But when you're providing licensed services as a
Yeah.
delegate of the BCBA, just doesn't work the same way.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of it. I always think of it as like a contractors in your house is like, I say I want you to redo the bathroom and maybe I want you to do they decide how they do it and the order they do it in. And like,
Exactly.
if they're truly an independent contractor. And then my contractor hires an electrician, they don't tell the electrician how to do it. They just say, I need you to do this job.
They just say, this is the objective, complete the objective. Right.
Yeah, like you are an expert electrician, you do it. But I would guess that it would be the same, that like if somebody comes in and you're like, you have to lay the tile and you're laying it in this certain way or something, and you have to do it based on what the contractor says, then that person might be an employee of the contractor.
Yeah. Well, the comparison there would be there's the contractor who has their own team that they bring. So those people that the head contractor is saying, okay, my team, go do this here. I have to tell you this. You're using my tools. We provide you the tools, yada, yada, yada. So those people on the contractor, same team. Exactly. Those are going to be W-2 employees. Yeah.
Right. Versus like if they're like, hey, buddy over here, electrician, I need you to come in and just like fix this I noticed like this weird wire here and I don't know what to do with it.
Yes.
Come in and deal with it.
And I promise you, the ABA therapy company isn't calling an RBT and saying, hey, buddy, this person needs therapy. Go do it.
Yeah, you do you. You do you. Do what you need to do. Let me know how it goes. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. Yes, I love it. So I want to switch gears a little bit and do a little bit of fun stuff as we come towards the end. A couple would you rathers for you. We're going to stick to the legal stuff. Wondering if you would rather work with giant ABA corporations for sales or smaller BCBA owned organizations in general.
When it comes to a sale, we're doing a purchase transaction.
Yes.
A bigger company for sure.
Okay. Yes.
Because I get
would
my
you
cut.
Yeah.
Right.
When you're working with companies to build their organization, would you rather work with a giant company, I guess like a company who's maybe messy with their compliance, or would you rather have 10 to make up the same, let's say, cost for you or like take home for you, 10 independent BCBAs who are eager but have no idea any of the legal stuff?
Their money-wise aside, I'd rather be working with independent BCBAs. Smaller practices if we're starting, but a bigger company if we're doing a transaction.
Yep.
You're gonna get
Yeah,
a
that
bunch
makes
of leads for this because we have a
yes.
we both have business
We got
mentorships. It's like, oh my gosh, you gotta go
I'm
check out my
here.
girl over there.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got to circle back to you anyway because I got a whole ABA tech company that we're launching soon that I'm going to need. Like, I remember when I met you, I was like, oh, I need contracts and things. I was like, these are things we haven't even,
I do
we're building out the
contracts and
clinical
things.
stuff. I know. I was like, we haven't even gotten to the contracts and like working, you know, being a vendor for different companies where they sign on to our,
Right.
like, yeah, we're coming up to it soon. We've like hit our clinical milestone. So now we gotta switch
Great.
gears to making the business stuff. So I gotta come back to you for that.
You know where to find
But
me.
I do. Would you rather your clients have a perfectly written HIPAA manual that they don't use? I think I know your answer to this, or no manual, but they have great staff behavior. They're compliant by accident.
That's a funny question. Oh my gosh. Who would I rather get into shape, or who would I rather represent when there's a problem?
Let's do it get into shape first, but then we're gonna answer the
Okay.
other one too. Is it different?
I would rather get into shape the people who are compliant by accident.
Okay.
Because it's
Yeah,
way
yeah,
easier for me to
You
come
just
up with
pass
a
them your
piece of
manual.
paper.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if
Let
they
me just
have
write down everything you're doing because it's right. Yeah.
Exactly. But if they've taken the time to put together a manual, or maybe they just bought one from somebody, but they're not doing any of it, correcting behavior, that's much more difficult than
Yeah.
just documenting the things that need to happen. So, yeah, I'd say the option where they're compliant by accident, I suppose.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
what about if there was a compliance issue that came up, like a regulatory, they got some type of infraction?
If there is a compliance issue and the government is involved and you don't have documentation, I cannot help you. Cannot save you if you don't even have the form. So, as long as you had the form in the other scenario, they're going to say that you had the intent to be compliant because you at least adopted the policy. And so you tried to do it correctly, but you can't prove that if you don't have any type of documentation, which, isn't necessarily fair on its face, but the government doesn't know you. They don't
Right.
care about you. They care about checking off the boxes on their list of regulatory compliance. So that's the first thing they're going to ask for. They're going to say, we got this report on the patients can go to the Health and Human Services website and say, this company did this, this, and this. I think it was a HIPAA breach. And the government is obligated to investigate those. Sometimes they can investigate it without reaching out to the company. And they say, this is a nothing burger. We don't do anything about it. But if they come to you, the first thing they're going to do is some CMS person in Chicago is emailing you and saying, send me your HIPAA policies and procedures because this person reported a breach. So you can explain away all you want to, but if you don't have a document to send them, breach.
Wow. That's wild. And I feel like there's probably a lot of BCBAs. Like, I would even say, like, this is making me wonder as an independent practitioner that I need to tighten these things up because I'm sure there are a lot of BCBAs who are probably doing their best to follow HIPAA, but may not, especially like independent people or boutique businesses, may not have all of these policies.
Right. And I promise that following HIPAA is easier if you do have the policies, especially if you go, there's options. You can come work with a lawyer and we will develop one that's specialized to your practice. That's the costly option and the most compliant option. It is a little cheaper to just go Google, where can I buy a HIPAA manual? And there's all sorts of consulting companies and retailers essentially that are just selling one. And I promise if you read through it and read everything that's in the policy document, it will be way easier to comply with HIPAA because the policy document is going to be based on the wording of the law. So it's pretty much a step-by-step instruction manual of what to do to be compliant. So the documentation definitely helps. A little bit of light
Yes.
reading on HIPAA compliance.
77 pages.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, I have one more for you. So,
Yeah.
would you rather help a business sell their company or help a business buy it?
So I love to help people sell because we're pretty much washing our hands on it. You're on your way. The buyer has to deal with liabilities in the future. But when someone's buying, I have to pay a lot more attention to, did you do diligence about this, and preparing
Mm.
the buyer for potential issues that could come up in the future. But selling is great because my client gets paid. They're happy to give me a chunk of the money they just got paid for
Yeah.
helping them get paid. Selling is much smoother for sure.
Yeah. Does it work the same as real estate? You get like when you sell, I guess I've only sold an apartment. So when I sold my apartment, when I bought my apartment, the money for each attorney came from the proceeds of the sale, I think.
So each party will pay for their own. So if
Okay.
you're the seller, they're going to have to pay me their own. They're probably, practically speaking, going to pay me out of the purchase price that they get. And then the buyer has to come up with money for the purchase price and for their own
For
legal
their
fees.
attorney. Yep. Okay, that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
like
Yep.
divorce. Yeah.
Right.
I like
Exactly.
these are the frameworks of law I have, and then
Listen,
some special education
it
law.
applies to pretty much
Yes.
every other framework of law. So you're right on point.
Yes. I love it.
Generalizing.
I love it. All right. I want to ask you a hot take, maybe an unpopular opinion, or like your own big, strong opinion about something in healthcare law or ABA compliance or the ABA field or the legal. I mean, I don't know if you want to blow up the legal field, but
Sure. No, I have a very specific ABA hot take, and this applies
okay.
to myself, so I don't intend to offend anyone. But I think that all of the people who right now are working very deeply in the ABA space, even these business people who are just coming in to buy, people who haven't ever thought about it, are all people who really would have benefited from ABA therapy when we were kids. And so now,
Oh, that's a really good hot take.
yeah. And so, whatever, everybody can take that as they wish, but I see examples of it constantly where I'm like, man, if you had ABA therapy when you were a kid, we would not be having this argument because you would have communicated this issue to me better.
Love that.
Yep. And
That's a good one.
I only find more and more examples of it as time goes on. So I think that's the case. But that's also a little bit, as opposed to a hot take, I also find that a little bit heartwarming because it's like we're doing things that, like little Ellesha would have loved this. So I'm making sure there's
Aw.
other kids who are having, all the things that they need to help them grow and be in society and exist the way they want to exist. That's my hot
Yes.
take.
Yes, I think that's really true because I feel like I've learned over the years that I most likely have ADHD and I've always been drawn to neurodivergence. And I think that, like, I don't know when they say, like, oh, ADHD brains are this percentage of the population. I'm like, but if I look around, everybody I know is neurodivergent in some way.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I work, it's my work, it's my personal life, it just is. And so that's a really good one. Christina, you got a hot take about healthcare law or ABA compliance or us in the ABA world?
Well, my hot take, especially Ellesha, right? Because like you said, you have all these business people and they see the potential of income in here. But then I feel like they also forget, it's easy to forget that we're providing quality care for the clients and you don't see them as a client, you see them as a number. So they're like, okay, BCBAs, we need to bill 40 hours when the average and something to maintain our mental health and our capacity is like 40 hours. Hell no, that's a red flag. Like,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my hot take of especially as, in your position is like, ooh, I wonder what those conversations look like. Okay, if they see the numbers, okay, well, we're going to scale this and we need to increase from 25 hours to 40 hours. And you also hear that a lot. It's like, oh, we got scooped up by a private equity and now everyone's leaving because the quality of care went down because everyone's burned out.
Totally. Yep. And that's one area where like legal compliance is actually helpful because we remind them of things like, the billing documentation is important. It has to be accurate. The services have to be good. If they're not good services, the patient's going to complain and then maybe you're going to get audited. So it's good to have, a little voice in their ear saying like, I know for you, this is a number, but remember that there are requirements for offering this service also.
Yes. That's a great point.
That's a good one too. I definitely agree with you. Sometimes there are some business people who just like totally, again, they could have benefited from some ABA therapy so that they would have a better holistic connection and more empathy to the situation.
Sure. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I think I don't feel like mine's fully formed, my hot take, but I think that the ABA, I feel like when I first started in the field, it was a field and now it's become an industry. And I think when it's an industry, we've cut out and you see like you have to have a 10-hour requirement, 20-hour requirement, all these things like we're cutting out people who could be served because like to Christina's point, a lot of it is about the bottom line.
Yep.
And BCBAs are usually in it to support people and make a difference in somebody's life. And I feel like the industry piece also gets you away from that.
It sure does. Well, that's why BCBAs are more important now than ever, because when anything becomes commercialized and gets, impacted by our society, it becomes really mechanical. So BCBAs need to be the humans.
Yeah.
And make sure that, this corporation isn't just a corporation, because this is a healthcare service. And you see that same issue everywhere. Hospitals, different like substance abuse centers, all sorts of places where once it becomes a whole industry, it gets dirtier. The services get worse. The people get meaner.
Yes.
So I think BCBAs definitely have a super important role to remain the humans in the equation and make sure
keep
that
the
that
heart.
part of the service line is still there. Exactly.
Yes. I love that. And I would love to end on your best moment or story where you helped an ABA provider get it right, or something that happened with a client.
First one that comes to your mind.
Yes.
I guess the first one that came to my mind is we had this client who was an employee of an ABA therapy company for years, and he was doing the administration. He's not a BCBA, but he was, really deep in the weeds. And he is now starting his own ABA therapy company. And it was a huge deal for him to give his 2-week notice to his first company. And to me, like, that's not the part I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, like, I don't care about your other job. Like, let's do all this stuff so you can do your new company. But he was like so thrilled to give his 2-week notice as an employee and become, just as now, and become the owner of his own company. And that was really, really sweet to me. It was very cute. And then he's always been really grateful about that opportunity. So being able to help someone in that entrepreneurial space who, like, really was experienced, and it was time to jump the nest, essentially. That was a very good moment.
Yes, I love that. And I love you validating, like, hey, this isn't actually that important to me or to, like, your journey here, but actually this is important to you. So we're going to respect that. And I'm going to
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder I have to give myself constantly is, okay, the client's goals are also important.
Yes, I know. I feel like that was I just posted on LinkedIn about that, working with parents, is that, like, it took me a long time to be like, I'm not supposed to tell parents what to do. I'm actually supposed to be a support system to help parents understand
for what to do.
Yes, exactly. And I think you're probably in that role as an attorney is like, 100%. It's not your job to do it your way. It's your job to make sure they're doing it in a legally compliant way, doing what they want to do in a legally compliant way.
Exactly. I'm just here to support them doing what they want to do. Sometimes I do have to step in and say, well, you can't do that. We have to do it my way. But for the most part, you're exactly right. It's supporting them as opposed to just running off on my own and getting it done how I want.
Which sometimes is hard because you're like, ooh, I would not. I've seen people do that way, and I would not do it that way.
Exactly.
You just compliant.
Tell them all the stuff and then let them choose and carry on.
Yes, which is also parenting too sometimes. Where I'm like, exactly. You just part it and hope for the best.
Like, all right, you have all the information. Good luck.
Good luck. I know. I love it. Well, we're gonna wrap up. I think Christina had to hop off because she maybe had a client issue.
Sure.
So you and I will wrap up. But do you have any takeaways that you would want our audience to know that a BCBA practice owner or BCBA listening should immediately walk away and do this?
I think I'd sum it up with, legal compliance seems scary, daunting, and technical. I understand that. But that's why there are people like me who spend all day, every day learning about all these things. And it's really not that scary. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is people shouldn't be scared of trying to figure out legal compliance. And in fact, they should be scared about ignoring legal compliance because that is going to create way, way, way bigger issues later. And there are fun people like me that you can come talk to about all these laws. I do my best to try and make these technical, daunting things just be an interesting story about how you're going to run your business and the things that you have to do. So embrace the legal compliance, even though it can, seem like a lot of red tape. And sometimes it's unfair. Sometimes I think the legal things you have to comply with actually don't promote the best patient care. But that's like your challenge, that you should be empowered to say, okay, not only am I going to do this the right way, I'm also going to do it in an effective and beneficial way.
Yeah, I love it.
Don't be afraid. If you can save kids, you can adopt a HIPAA manual. It's not that hard.
Oh my
I
gosh,
promise.
that's a good way to put it. I love it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That's a great takeaway. Amazing. So I'm going to leave it with that. And for everybody who's listening, if there's anything in this episode that made you nervous, then take Ellesha's advice. It's better to confront it than avoid it. It's a sign to get a
100%.
consultation. And
Yes.
we are going to put all of Ellesha's information in the show notes so that you can contact her directly. So that you can get the support that you need. And if you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, share, and tag us if this was the episode that prompted you to get your legal stuff in order. And we will see everybody next time. So yeah, bye.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Happily.